Imagine the scene. It is February 11th, 2012, and the sun is setting over Los Angeles. The air is thick with that electric energy you only feel during Grammy weekend. The atmosphere smells like expensive perfume and anticipation. It's the biggest night in music, a time for celebration and glamour, just hours away from the spotlight. The Beverly Hilton is the center of the universe. Paparazzi are lined up deep, their flashes creating constant lightning against the red carpets. The lobby is a sea of silk, diamonds, and famous faces gathered for Clive Davis's legendary pre-Grammy party. But while the champagne is poured and the bass starts to thump in the ballroom, something unthinkable is happening in Suite 434. Can you wrap your head around that contrast? It's almost too cinematic, like a script written to show the dark side of fame. While the industry's elite were laughing, a tragedy was unfolding in silence. Then, the world just stopped. It felt like a punch to the gut for millions across the globe. Do you remember where you were when the news broke? Suddenly, every phone started buzzing at the same time. The headlines were flashing in bold black letters. Whitney Houston found dead. It was one of those moments that feels like a glitch in the Matrix. How could she be gone? Not Whitney, not the woman whose voice could shatter glass and heal hearts. The irony is soul-crushing. You had a party raging on the ground floor, music pumping through the vents, while the most legendary voice of our time was silenced in a bathtub just a few hundred feet away. It's a detail that stays with you forever. It was a scene of pure Hollywood tragedy. People were still arriving at the hotel, fixing their ties and adjusting their gowns, unaware that the Queen of Pop was already gone. When reality set in, the atmosphere shifted from celebration to heavy mourning. The music didn't stop immediately, which made everything feel even more eerie and surreal as the night went on. But why did this hit so hard? We aren't just talking about a celebrity who had a few hits. We are talking about Whitney. To the world, she was simply the voice. She was the gold standard of music. She was a once-in-a-lifetime talent and the queen of every stage she touched. Every single person who picked up a microphone after her was trying to catch a fraction of her magic. She had effortless power, a range that seemed to go on forever, and a presence that made her look like royalty. From the moment Clive Davis introduced her, she was the golden girl, perfect and untouchable. She was the one who made the national anthem sound like a heavenly decree, yet as we look back, we realize that the scene at the Beverly Hilton wasn't just a freak accident. It was the climax of a story written in the tabloids for years. The struggle was hidden beneath the stage lights, even when the cracks were beginning to show everywhere. It was the final, tragic note of a song that had been turning into a dissonant melody for a long time. We saw the headlines, the missed shows, and the heartbreaking photos, but we wanted to believe in the comeback. We wanted to believe the voice would return in all its glory. Sadly, reality was much darker and more complicated than any of us knew. How did she go from being America's sweetheart to that lonely room in the Hilton? How does someone with the world at her feet end up losing it all? Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We're diving deep into the final heartbreaking chapters of Whitney's life, and you won't want to miss a single detail. This journey is devastating. Rumors say she was struggling more than anyone let on, and as we peel back the layers, we see a woman fighting a battle that no amount of fame could win. This is the story of the rise, the fall, and the silent cries for help that the world ignored until it was too late. To truly understand how Whitney ended up in that hotel room, we have to look back at the girl who seemingly had it all. Long before the headlines, she was the Princess of Newark. Just picture a young girl with a voice like liquid gold standing in the middle of New Hope Baptist Church. Her mother, Whitney Houston, was already legendary, and she taught Whitney how to command a room with a single breath. You can almost see her, can't you? A skinny teenager with a smile that lit up the entire building, hitting notes that shouldn't be humanly possible. It was pure, raw, and undeniably special. Then enter Clive Davis. The man was a visionary. When he saw Whitney, he didn't just see a singer, he saw a global brand. He saw a crossover superstar who could bridge the gap between R&B and pop like no one before. Clive curated every aspect of her existence. He wanted her to be the golden girl, the perfect pop star safe for every living room in America. She had to be polished, polite, and always perfect. Can you imagine the immense weight of that? Every dress, interview, and song was carefully selected to maintain this pristine, clean image. She was the sweetheart we all felt a need to protect, but perfection is an incredible incredibly heavy crown. While the world saw a flawless icon, Whitney was a human being with a rebellious streak buried under layers of hairspray. She was living a life designed by others, and that kind of pressure can start to cook you from the inside out. Then came 1992, the year the narrative changed forever. That's when the good girl officially met the bad boy. When Whitney married Bobby Brown, the world's jaw collectively dropped. It was the ultimate "what is she thinking?" moment. People couldn't understand why the most sophisticated woman in music was with the gritty performer from New Edition, who had a bit of a reputation. But to Whitney, Bobby was a breath of fresh air. He was real, raw, and didn't care about being America's sweetheart. Their marriage was a massive turning point in public perception. Suddenly, the image Clive Davis spent years building showed its first tiny cracks. The media started circling like sharks, waiting for a slip-up, and the fairy tale started to feel a lot more like a tabloid drama. Yet, even as the gossip began to swirl, her career was hitting heights most artists only dream of. We are talking about the peak era of The Bodyguard. I Will Always Love You didn't just top the charts, it owned the entire planet. She was at the absolute peak of the Arista Records power structure. She was a powerhouse, a global phenomenon who seemed totally unstoppable. If you were alive in the 90s, you couldn't escape her voice. It was the soundtrack to every wedding and victory. She was winning Grammys and breaking records left and right. On the surface, she was the queen of the world, sitting on a throne of platinum records. But we have to look at the support system around her. Whitney Houston was a powerful force, trying to guide her through the madness. The Houston family was tight-knit, but they were also living within the hurricane of Whitney's fame. There were so many voices in her ear, executives and family members wanting a piece of the magic. How do you stay grounded when everyone treats you like a goddess? How do you keep your head on straight when every move is a multi-million-dollar business decision? Despite the records, a shadow was growing. It's hard to pinpoint when the light started to dim. Was it the pressure of being perfect? Was it the volatile energy of her marriage? Or was it something darker lurking under the surface? The higher you climb, the harder the wind blows. Rumors were starting to whisper, rumors of missed rehearsals, and a voice showing signs of strain. The world was cheering, but those closest to her saw a concerning story. But wait, because what comes next is where the dream turns into a nightmare. Are you ready for when the curtain started to close? The fall was coming, very fast, as the glitz and glamour of the 90s started to fade into the rearview mirror. The halo over Whitney's head was beginning to dim in a way that felt increasingly permanent. It wasn't a sudden crash, but rather a slow, agonizing slide that the public watched in real time, often through the blurry lens of paparazzi cameras. We are talking about the transition into the early 2000s, a period where the Golden Girl image Clive Davis had so carefully crafted wasn't just cracking, it was shattering into a million pieces. The world began to notice that the voice wasn't always showing up. Remember the 72nd Academy Awards in 2000? Whitney was scheduled to perform a massive medley, but she was reportedly fired by the musical director during rehearsals. Rumors swirled that she was out of it, singing the wrong songs and seemingly lost in her own world. It was a shocking blow. This was Whitney Houston, a woman whose professionalism was once as legendary as her range. Then came the moment that truly sent shockwaves through the industry. In 2001, at the Michael Jackson 30th anniversary special, Whitney walked onto that stage and the room went silent for all the wrong reasons. She looked incredibly fragile, almost skeletal. The weight loss was so extreme that it became the only thing people could talk about the next morning. Was it the pressure? Was it the stress of her marriage to Bobby Brown? Or was it the substances that the tabloids had been whispering about for years? The whispers were turning into shouts, and the public's concern was rapidly morphing into a morbid fascination. We wanted the old Whitney back, but the woman on that stage seemed like a ghost of her former self. The tension reached a breaking point in 2002 during that infamous sit-down interview with Diane Sawyer. If you were around back then, you know exactly which one I'm talking about. It was supposed to be her big moment to clear the air, to tell her side of the story and prove she was still in control. Instead, it became one of the most polarizing moments in television history. This is where we got the line that would haunt her legacy forever. Crack is whack. She looked Diane in the eye and admitted to using various substances, but she famously denied using crack cocaine because, in her words, she made too much money to smoke something so cheap. It was a bizarre, heartbreaking attempt to maintain some level of diva status while her personal life was clearly in tatters. tears. You could see the defiance in her eyes, but you could also see the deep underlying pain of a woman who was fighting a battle she wasn't winning. Things only got stranger when the world was invited inside her home through the reality show Being Bobby Brown in 2005. Can you believe the Queen of Pop actually agreed to this? Gone was the elegant, untouchable diva in the sequined gowns. Instead, we saw a raw, unfiltered, and often chaotic version of Whitney. She was shouting hell to the no, and engaging in messy, loud arguments with Bobby that felt way too private for national television. It was like watching a train wreck you couldn't turn away from. For many fans, this was the final nail in the coffin of the Golden Girl image. The mystery was gone, replaced by a reality that was gritty, uncomfortable, and deeply sad. But perhaps the most tragic part of this era was the physical toll it took on her instrument. Her voice, that once-in-a-generation gift, was changing. The silky, smooth tones were being replaced by a raspy, thin quality that made hitting the high notes a struggle. There are recordings from her later tours where you can hear the strain, and it's honestly hard to listen to. You can feel her trying to reach for the magic that used to come so effortlessly, only to find it just out of reach. Behind the scenes, the stories were even darker. Rumors of trashed hotel rooms, constant drug use, and a home life that was a revolving door of enablers were everywhere. And that's the real question, isn't it? Who was actually looking out for her? When you are a global icon, you are surrounded by yes men who are often more concerned with keeping the machine running than with your actual well-being. It is incredibly difficult to tell a superstar no when they are the ones signing everyone's paychecks. Whitney was the center of a multi-million-dollar industry, and as long as there was a chance for a comeback, the pressure to perform never stopped. She was caught in a cycle of fame, addiction, and expectations that seemed impossible to escape, even as her world continued to spiral further out of control. The shadows were growing longer, and the road ahead was looking more uncertain than ever. The comeback narrative of 2009 felt like a collective breath of relief for the entire world. After years of headlines about her marriage and her health, we finally saw Whitney sitting across from Oprah Winfrey in what was billed as the most anticipated music interview of the decade. She looked radiant, didn't she? She was clear-eyed, elegant, and ready to tell her truth. She didn't hold back either, opening up about the dark days spent in her pajamas, the emotional roller coaster with Bobby Brown, and her grueling battle with addiction. It felt like the Golden Girl was finally reclaiming her narrative. When her album I Look to You debuted at #1, it seemed like the miracle had actually happened. Clive Davis was right there beside her, beaming like a proud father, convinced that his protege was back on top. But as much as we wanted to believe in the fairy tale, there was a lingering question in the air. Was Whitney actually ready for the spotlight, or was the industry just ready for her to make the money again? The cracks in the comeback started to show almost immediately when she hit the road for the Nothing But Love World Tour in 2010. This was supposed to be her victory lap, but for many fans, it turned into a heartbreaking reality check. Have you ever seen the footage from those shows? In cities like Brisbane and London, the reception was brutal. Fans who had paid hundreds of dollars to hear the legendary voice of their youth were met with a performer who was struggling to breathe, let alone hit those iconic high notes. She was coughing, taking long breaks between songs, and her range seemed to have vanished. The boos from the audience were loud, and the demands for refunds were even louder. It was devastating to watch a queen be humiliated on the very stages she used to command. The grace was there, but the instrument was broken. While Whitney was struggling on stage, the media landscape of the mid-2000s was becoming a toxic playground. We have to remember that this was the height of the Death Watch culture. Gossip blogs like Perez Hilton were at their peak, and they were relentless. They didn't see a woman fighting for her sobriety or her dignity. They saw a punchline. The internet was filled with cruel memes and jokes about her appearance and her past struggles. Looking back now, the lack of empathy is genuinely shocking. We were essentially watching a legend drown in slow motion while the world pointed and laughed. It was a much different time than today, where we have a bit more understanding of mental health and addiction. Back then, if you were a superstar and you were failing, you were fair game for the harshest ridicule imaginable. Behind the scenes, her peers in the industry were watching with a mix of fear and sadness. Legends like Aretha Franklin and Dionne Warwick were publicly supportive, but the whispers in the hallways of the record labels were much grimmer. Even Mariah Carey, who had often been pitted against Whitney by the media, showed nothing but respect, yet everyone could see the light was fading. The problem was that Whitney was the center of a massive financial machine. There were so many people whose paychecks depended on her being okay, even when she clearly wasn't. Interventions were whispered about, and rehab stints came and went. But the pressure to maintain the image of a functional superstar never let up. By the time 2011 rolled around, there was a glimmer of hope. Whitney had filmed the movie Sparkle, and people who saw the early footage said she looked fantastic. She was acting again, she was singing gospel songs, and it felt like she was finding her footing in a more mature role. She didn't need to be the pop princess of 1987 anymore. But as the 2012 Grammy weekend approached, the energy in Los Angeles started to shift into something chaotic and unpredictable. Despite the rehabs and the new projects, the early 2010s were leading toward a finale that no one could have scripted, even in their darkest dreams. The shadows were closing in, and the countdown to that tragic afternoon at the Beverly Hilton was ticking faster than anyone realized. The world was about to lose its voice, and the signs were everywhere if we had only known where to look. The energy in Los Angeles during that final week in February 2012 was nothing short of manic. It was Grammy weekend, the one time of year when every titan of the music industry descends upon the city, and the Beverly Hilton is always the eye of that glittering, high-stakes storm. For Whitney, this should have been a moment of triumph. A chance to show her peers that she was still the queen of the scene. But the reports coming out of the hotel rehearsals for Clive Davis's legendary pre-Grammy gala were deeply unsettling to everyone who witnessed them. Eyewitnesses spoke of a woman who seemed dangerously hyperactive, wandering the halls in mismatched clothes, and reportedly even performing erratic handstands by the hotel pool just to get attention. Can you imagine the scene? The woman who once defined global elegance and poise was now a source of worried whispers in the very corridors where she was once undisputed royalty. It was like watching a beautiful, priceless vase with 1,000 tiny cracks finally start to shatter in front of a live audience. Then came Thursday night, just 48 hours before the end. Whitney made a surprise appearance at a party hosted by Kelly Price at the True Hollywood nightclub. In a moment that now feels like a haunting final farewell, she was coaxed onto the stage for what would be her last public performance. She sang "Jesus Loves Me." It wasn't the polished, crystalline version the world had fallen in love with decades earlier on the radio. This was something different, raw, raspy, and heavy with a kind of desperate spiritual weight that chilled those who heard it. People in the room said you could hear the struggle in every note, a legendary voice fighting a losing battle against its own decay. When she left the club that night, photographers captured her looking completely disheveled, with visible scratches on her wrists and a look of pure exhaustion in her eyes. The tabloid headlines the next morning were predictably cruel, but nobody realized they were documenting the literal beginning of the end. Saturday, February 11th, arrived with an atmosphere of strange, heavy stillness inside Suite 434. In the lobby below, the chaos of the music world was in full swing, with celebrities checking in and fans screaming at the entrance. People reported seeing Whitney earlier that day looking completely lost, with water literally dripping from her hair as if she'd walked out of a shower and simply forgotten where she was going or what she was doing. There were even rumors that she smelled strongly of alcohol and cigarettes, a jarring and painful contrast to the high-end luxury of the hotel and the Golden Girl image Clive Davis had worked so hard to protect. While the rest of Hollywood was busy getting into their custom tuxedos and designer gowns, Whitney was drifting through a haze that no one could seem to reach her in. Up in her room, the preparations for the party were supposed to be happening, but the energy was all wrong. It felt like a house of cards waiting for the slightest breeze to knock it all down. The actual discovery of her body remains one of the most chilling sequences in pop culture history. Her assistant had left the suite briefly to run some last-minute errands, leaving Whitney to get ready for the big night ahead. When she returned and found the bathroom door locked, the silence inside must have felt like a physical weight. After she managed to get inside, the sight was devastating beyond words. Whitney was lying face down in the bathtub, submerged in about a foot of water. The panic that erupted in that suite is the stuff of nightmares. Security was called, paramedics rushed through the gold-trimmed hallways, and for several frantic, breathless minutes, they tried everything humanly possible to bring her back. But the world's most famous voice had already gone silent. The iron irony is almost too painful to handle. Just floors below, the sound check for the gala was still thumping through the floorboards. The party was literally starting while the guest of honor was being pronounced dead. When the autopsy results were eventually released to the public, they confirmed what many had feared in their hearts. It was a perfect storm of health issues and substance use. The medical examiner pointed to atherosclerotic heart disease and the presence of cocaine as the primary drivers of her death. It wasn't just the accidental drowning, it was the fact that her heart, weakened by years of intense pressure, emotional turmoil, and personal battles, simply couldn't take anymore. But even with the official report, the mystery refused to die down. To this day, there are persistent rumors about mystery guests who might have been in the room during those final hours. Some claim the suite was sanitized before the authorities arrived, with drug paraphernalia allegedly whisked away by anonymous enablers to protect her legacy from further scandal. Who was really there in those final minutes? Were there people who could have stepped in? These questions still hang over the Beverly Hilton like a dark shadow, reminding us that even in her final moments, Whitney was surrounded by a level of drama and secrecy that she could never quite escape. The silence that followed the loss of Whitney Houston didn't just mark the end of an era, it was the beginning of a series of echoes that would eventually consume her only daughter, Bobbi Kristina. The parallels are truly terrifying. 3 years later, Bobbi Kristina was found in a near-identical situation, unconscious in a bathtub, a tragic mirror image of the woman she called her world. It is impossible to talk about Whitney's end without that second weight. Both women were bright, talented, and full of life, yet both were seemingly swallowed by the same dark tide that had haunted their family for decades. It makes you realize that the cycle of pain and addiction can be a generational storm that sweeps away everything in its path if it isn't broken early. Today, when we look back at Whitney, we are forced to reconcile two very different versions of the same icon. Was she the tragic victim of a ruthless industry that squeezed every bit of soul out of her until there was nothing left? Or the undisputed champion of the stage? Newark's greatest vocalist? It's a debate that still rages on today. Many blame Clive Davis for curating an image that left her no room to breathe. Others point the finger at Bobby Brown, claiming the bad boy influence introduced a chaos she was never equipped to handle. But perhaps the truth is more complicated. Maybe she was a woman caught in a perfect storm, where her own perfectionism met a world that demanded too much and offered too little protection in return. The industry has changed since that night at the Beverly Hilton in 2012. Back then, the tabloid death watch culture was at its peak, and stars were mocked for their struggles rather than supported. Today, there's a nuanced conversation about mental health and addiction. We see how modern stars are allowed to prioritize their well-being in ways that Whitney never could. If she were starting today, would she have been given the space to heal? It's a heartbreaking thought. We've learned that the price of fame shouldn't be a person's soul. But for Whitney, it felt like the toll was paid in full every single day she was under the spotlight. But let's pause and imagine a different timeline. What if she had skipped that pre-Grammy party? What if she had stayed home, far away from the chaos of the hotel lobby and the whispers of the industry insiders? Rumors say she was getting her voice back during those final months, and some experts believe she was on the verge of a vocal renaissance. Could she have fully recovered that glass-shattering range? We will never know, and that's the saddest part of her story. The what-ifs are endless. What if the industry had protected its crown jewel instead of pushing her toward the next hit? Now, I want to hear from you because your voice matters in keeping her memory alive. What is your favorite Whitney Houston memory? Is it the way she hit that final high note in I Will Always Love You? Or the soul she poured into her gospel performances? Do you think the music industry failed her by valuing the image over the woman? Or was her path an inevitable result of the pressure that comes with being the voice? Let us know in the comments, because reflecting on her journey is the only way we can ensure history doesn't repeat itself. Whitney Houston was more than just a headline or a cautionary tale. She was a daughter, a mother, and a trailblazer who opened doors for every artist who followed. While her end was tragic, her music remains a legacy of pure joy. We should cherish the gifts she gave us and remember the woman who sang from the depths of her soul. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the life of a legend. If you appreciated this tribute, like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the lives of the icons who shaped our world. Rest in peace, Whitney. Your voice will live on forever.